Hello, and welcome to the Digital Publishing Podcast, Episode 4 A Box of Lego. Today we're speaking with Lars Wallin, co founder of Colibrio Software. This is a fun one. Lars, thank you so much for joining me for Episode 4. How are you doing this morning?
It's very good, thank you. I'm calling in from a very sunny and warm Gothenburg. So, yeah.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. Yeah, London is a bit grey today, despite being warm. Go figure. So, you meet a lot of characters in this industry, especially in the kind of pub tech space.
You do.
And Lars, for anyone who's met him, is definitely one of them. Lars is amazing. We spoke a lot at the London Book Fair this year. And it was so interesting. You have such cool stuff going on. So I really wanted to get you onto the show and to talk about some of this stuff that you've been working on. And I also kind of want to know your origin story because I don't know it at all. And so I thought you'd be an interesting person to talk to.
Thank you. Likewise. And yes, I had a great time at the London Book Fair. And I remember having a very nice discussion about AI stuff and accessibility related thingies and
all the hot topics.
All the hot topics, all of them. Would you like me to maybe introduce myself?
Yeah, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and your company and what you do, that would be great.
Yes. So I'm Lars, and I work as a co-founder, and I also work as a product manager. And also, I usually call myself the CEO, but not the CEO, but the Chief Experimentation Officer. I would make a lousy CEO. But yes, Chief Experimentation Officer means that basically I do the dog fooding of our product, try out our APIs, and try to make wonderful things happen.
Should we just explain dog fooding for our the publishing side of our audience?
Yes, because that because that sounded weird otherwise. Yes,
it's a Google term, I think, originally, isn't it?
It might be. I think it's older than that, maybe. But it and I think it's actually the origin is, I think, that there was a brand of dog food that sold themselves by having like staff or maybe even the owner that actually ate their own dog food to show that it was high quality. And
checks out.
But then it checks out, yes, and then it has become a term in software development, where the company that sells a software package also uses their own software, so that they are their own. They check their own quality, and they are basically emulating being their own customers.
Right, and you do this?
Yes, always. So. And if we didn't do this, we would not be as popular as we are.
Right.
Because this means that during my experimentation, I will monkey around with the APIs, and I will find usability issues from a developer standpoint. And I will also find quirks and report them back to our wonderful engineers. So... And yeah, so before anything reaches our customers, we will have played around with the APIs and made sure that the developer experience is top notch, and that there are as few quirks as possible.
And how would you describe Colibrio?
Yes, so Colibrio is a bit unique. It is a reading system framework software development kit. So I usually say that there are on the market a bunch of white label reading systems, which I sometimes compare to kit cars. You buy them and you can put paint on them, and you can choose what decals you want to put on them, but it's still going to be the same underlying brand of car. Whereas we are a box of Legos, and all the Legos fit together, but you can build whatever you want. And that's also the reason why we fit into so many different categories of application. You can use us on the back end for just working with the file formats, EPUB, PDF, and audiobooks, to just have an API, an object-oriented way of programmatically asking questions about the book, and use that for like ingestion pipelines and so on. But most people, of course, use us to build reading systems. And but
Right.
we don't have any front end, no menus, buttons, whatever. So we're a development framework. It's very much like working with the web framework technologies.
Right.
You can use us to build many different things.
Right. So we'll come back and talk about some of the companies that have worked with you and have built Colibrio into their products. But I
Yes,
think before we get to that, could you perhaps take us back in time a little bit and tell us about your career journey to this point and how you ended
yes,
up as the Chief Experimentation Officer?
yes. I've always been an experimentation person, I guess. I'm one of those old people. As we before we started the actual pod, we discussed my uh, advanced age, and
It is not that
so
advanced, but we will not repeat
no,
it here.
no, no, no. So I got my first computer and started programming at the age of 10. It was 1984, so you can count backwards.
What was the computer?
It was a C64, a Commodore 64.
Amazing.
So which was also really popular in the Great Britain, as I
Yes,
understood.
my brother had one.
Oh, I still have one because I adore it. My bread box. Yeah, so I had one of the first C64s that came out, and started programming BASIC and so on. And then but I also been always been really interested in graphic design, etc. So that has always gone hand in hand. And I started my career as a proper software engineer, so to speak, or software developer, I should say, because I don't have an engineering degree. I started that in '95, I guess, with the advent of the internet,
Wow.
where I started immediately started making web applications. And I've always, before I started working on this project, I've always been into business software, which I think has been really beneficial because it has taught me how to produce enterprise level software, which is dependable and sustainable,
Right.
which is super important in this industry, of course, because we usually say that we develop infrastructural software, so it
Right.
cannot break. So yeah, and but I ended up. I've been working in e-learning, as I said, in business systems, in information systems of different sorts. Uh, but I guess I came into document management and different document formats and so on when I started working at a company that did a lot of technical documentation. And in those days, it was the early 2000s. It was still FrameMaker and XML based
Right.
across media publishing. And so I'm still very fond of XML. I think it's still like in many cases an unmatched format for describing data.
Right. It's
Um,
foundational.
it's really foundational, and it can be in some cases a better format for describing data, I would say, than for example JSON.
Right.
Not always, but some ways, sometimes. Anyway, and then I also started working with again document management, lifecycle management for documents, which is still also really beneficial for me in the publishing space. I'm always been really interested in archival and version management, and so on. Also worked a lot in e-learning. And then in 2012, I think, I, together with my colleagues Ulf and Andreas, we started working on a publishing platform that developed into a product called MyWo,
Right.
which was a complete set of tools to create and to publish and to read digital mags, as we call them.
Right.
And a mag was basically, it turned into an implementation basically of the web publications draft that was around in, I guess, 2016, 17, something like that.
Right.
Because we wanted to make something that was, aligned with standards, but yeah, you could like have responsive, glossy magazines and so on. So we wanted to
Right.
bring back the fanzine basically, and that was hugely, a big success. We didn't make any
Mm.
money from it though, because the audience was, it was direct to consumer,
Right.
um, and it's hard to make money from that kind of business.
Hmm.
But what we did do was that we developed, we spent like 4 years developing a pagination engine, because, and that's still something that really sets us aside, sets us apart from other techie uh, companies in this space.
Could you just explain what that means?
Yes, I would say that since the beginning of time, the most pristine way of presenting a book, let's say, is in the form of a scroll, like in the olden days, where you
Oh,
don't
that kind of
really
scroll.
need, yes, you don't really need to care about anything than more than line breaks. And then with the printing press, and when we started having manuscripts that were paginated, oh, that was before the printing press, of course, but even the olden monks had problems with, how do I actually end this page and move over the next text that in the manuscript to the next page, and
Right.
still keeping the flow and the aesthetics and everything. So pagination is the art of breaking a text that is supposed to be like, kept together and just flow on, to break that across pages, and hopefully not affecting the reading experience and the aesthetics too much.
Right. And that's a particular challenge in digital when the page can be different things.
Oh goodness me! But it's super important, and it's always been important, even the digital space. But also from, if you come from a, like, if you speak to Ken, for
Ken
example,
Jones,
or
episode 2.
Ulf, who is the CEO of Colibrio, he also used to work in lead type back in the day. It's
Right.
always been, and even with written manuscripts, it's always been a huge issue, how to carry things over from one page to another.
Right.
So we spent 4 years building our own pagination engine, because we found that the underlying technologies, and this is still true today, I would say, the underlying technologies in the web platform for pagination is not good, and
Right.
it's the APIs are very lacking. So we didn't want to, and we couldn't basically rely on them, because if you want to make a glossy magazine look good on any screen size, like a phone or a big screen TV or whatever, you need something that has some sort of intelligence built into it, basically.
Right.
So we spent a lot of time and effort developing what we call the reflow engine. Now, Simon, I'm moving into the Colibrio era. Is that okay for you?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
We had based our pagination technology around the work of Dave Kramer, and among others, of course. But when the IDPF gave over the responsibility for EPUB
W3C.
yes, thank you. I decided to hop on a plane to San Francisco for the TPAC meeting, where the
Wow.
handover was going to be, basically done.
Right. It's a high tension meeting.
Yes, very much so. And I just wanted to show people what you could do with a proper pagination engine, and that a lot of the goals that I think that Dave had when he wrote his article, basically, that was published on W3C also, I think. Rules for pagination of Latin text, I think it was something similar to that. But anyway, so I showed people the pagination engine, and I had talks with a lot of the people coming from the publishing industry, looking at the reading system we built for web publications, basically. And they said, Lars, you listen to me very carefully now. You will go home to Gothenburg and you will make something of this that is compatible with EPUB, because we don't have any proper EPUB 3 compatible reading systems, and we need them because the industry has lost faith in EPUB 3 as a standard, because there are no EPUB reading systems that properly can display an ebook that is compliant with the specification, with all the bells and whistles. There
Right.
are always caveats.
This is how we ended up with iBooks Author, right, at the time.
Yes, exactly. And I wouldn't, throw too much shade at Apple Books or iBooks at the time, because I guess they did their best. And to be honest, their extensions of EPUB are still within their own namespace and
Right.
everything. So they did it. They extended the spec basically the correct way, basically. But it's very much proprietary still, and what was asked for was something where the publishing industry could finally just point to something and say, here's a reference
Yeah.
implementation ish, and it's possible to it is possible to do a spec compliant reading system tech. Yeah. So that was the goal I had when I came back, and I said, let's give it 6 months and turn this into an EPUB compatible reading system.
Right.
And by 6 months we had our first customer, which was Demark in Canada, because they wanted a web-based reading system for their Cantoc uh, product
Right.
that powered the Quebec library system, basically.
Wow. That's quite a first customer.
Oh yes, it was wonderful, and the people working there were really awesome. So, and really enthusiastic and everything. So it was, and I also got feedback from the actual library services, and they were just like flabbergasted by suddenly being able to open both EPUB 2 and EPUB 3 in thousands of titles without any significant hiccups. So.
Brilliant.
Um, yeah, and the only thing we did basically, and the only way you can do this in that short amount of time, is to just dig into the spec
Right.
and just implement the specification and do it in a domain centric way, which is that you don't come up with your own concepts. You implement what's in the specification.
Right.
And I mean, it served us so well because we that is basically why we still exist and we are happy.
Really.
And
So you weren't tempted to build proprietary ways out of problems.
no, you can't do that because then again, coming from an enterprise software background, if you can't integrate with the rest of the world, you're not going to have any customers. I mean, the enterprise world is all about communicating data between different systems. It's
Right.
always an ecosystem, right? So proprietary exchange formats and so on. It's not never going to fly. And also, yeah, you would. Why? It's just why. If the and we've had our discussions in the in the reading system community, and I'm always, and people know this, right? I'm always really opinionated when it comes to always sticking to the standards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Never,
Here, here.
don't come up with your own bullshit. Always stick to the standards because, and I told people this. It's the next step in the Accessibility Act or in EU regulation is interoperability between reading systems. I'm sure of it
Right.
because that's where e-learning is heading. So and as these systems, just as the web browser, become infrastructure, regulation is going to. But it's just the right way to go about things, right?
Yeah.
Um, but yes, so and we now. It's been a real success story, especially during COVID. We've always been really popular with libraries and with e-learning systems because in these, especially when we have customers all around the world, and we are really big, for example, in South America. And we've built our technology so that we are a front end stack only, so we can run offline. And
Ah.
this is like once you've opened, for example, the demo.colibrio.com reader, the entire reading system tech is on your computer.
Right. Demo.colibrio.com.
Yes.
Right. So people can open that and have a look.
Yes, that is the home of the vanilla reader, which is my
Right.
pet project. Yes, so and because we are like a front end library, we work offline. This works really well for school systems,
Right.
especially in countries where North America, South America, the Middle East, and Asia, and Africa, where you have spotty internet connections. Um, Also, that we are web first. The idea of having a huge range of the systems that are going to use EPUB and PDFs still, and also audiobooks, I guess, are going to be web based, and we are still pretty much the only like commercially available uh, reading system for web applications that is stable and so on. So I guess that's also been a huge deal, right? That we have like a out of the box solution where you can just get something up and running in your web browser. Um,
Yeah. Well, that leads me neatly to my next question, actually.
yes.
How does Colibrio differ from other similar sort of things out there like Adobe RMSDK or digital editions, as people will often know the front end, and
Yeah.
Redium and Thorium?
Yes. RMSDK is of course crashing and burning at the moment because of they, because they
No
didn't.
comment.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, from just with RMSDK is like nah, no. So I wouldn't even compare myself to them because, and I wouldn't say that they are actually a viable, alternative anymore. Even maybe, well, that's how people speak about it anyway. I don't really have any. I've never
Right.
worked with it, but the similarities between RMSDK and us is probably that we are more low level, maybe. So we are a framework and not a white label reading system, as I said. So
Right.
we have a bunch of APIs, and that's also what the as I understood it again, that the RM SDK is also like an API. Uh,
Right. And just to clue in some of our less technical listeners, when Lars
yes,
is referring to
sorry.
RMSDK, so he's talking about Adobe and a lot of the reading systems out there, particularly reading apps that you would have come across for supermarkets and things. Everyone had one at one point or another. A lot of those have been built using this Adobe RMSDK, and that's a lot of that's to
Yes.
do with copyright. That's to do with DRM, so that they can open it on their computer. You may have done that yourself, actually. With some retailers, will still let you quote unquote download to your own computer, and usually to keep that protected, that will use RMSDK to make a callback to a server and authenticate and make sure that you're the customer and that you're not having access to a raw EPUB. So
Yes.
that became really dominant for a very long time. And of course, there's Adobe Digital Editions, which a lot of the publishing industry uses to view EPUBs, even still, despite the fact that its problems are rather well documented at this point.
Yeah, and to be honest, back in 2017 when we started this, that's when I went to the TPAC meeting. Everybody said that just they discounted or didn't even count RMSDK as an implementation of EPUB because it was so buggy. So they, because of Adobe's lack of interest in EPUB, that's basically why we exist.
Right,
Um, and also the ending of the Redium One project, the shelving of the Redium One project is also maybe one of the big reasons we exist. So RMSDK or the Adobe reading system framework is yeah. I don't know if anybody would still start a new project with that. I don't
right,
think so. And when it comes to Redium, that's a wonderful open source project, of course. It has a very different architecture than us, and it's we. I think it's taken a long time for them to get up and running with their. Again, they shelved their 1.0 version and started moving over to Redium 2, the Redium 2 architecture. I haven't built a reading system using the Redium 2 framework myself. It would be super fun. I haven't had time.
it's a weekend project.
Um, yes, maybe actually it would be kind of fun. But yes, we have a lot of customers that have moved away from it because of I think it's an open source project, and I do love open source, and we are all open source geeks at Colibrio. But it's also, I think, if you have a project that has a deadline and a budget, it's probably not. Yeah, we are like the alternative where you have a supported, well, uh, where you don't have breaking changes and so on. So, but the Redium project is ongoing, and I know that they're working also on a web client now.
Right,
So yes, Thorium I'm really fond of. It's a really nice desktop reading system based on the Redium code base and wrapped in Electron, so it can run on Electron is sorry. I'm going to
Yeah.
yes,
Do you know
I'm
what I'm
going
going
to
to ask?
explain what Electron is. Yes, so Electron is like a shell where you can put your web application basically and make it act as a normal Mac or PC or Linux or Windows, I should say, instead of PC, and Linux app.
Right.
And that's, yeah. So that's a wonderful project. And I am very impressed with what Daniel and the other people at in the Thorium working group, so to speak, what they've done. So
Yeah, I'm a big fan
yeah,
too.
yeah, it works really, really well, and I know they put a lot of time and effort into it. So yeah, it's a lovely project. So, but that's basically the thing, right? And again, as I said, the reason you would go with Colibrio is basically if you want to do something that is out of the box and where you want it to integrate with your existing ecosystem of like services or whatever.
Right. And how does the DRM aspect work?
We many peeps now use LCP, which is
Right, which is from
what.
the Redium project.
Yeah, exactly. It's lightweight content protection, maybe something like that. Anyway, people are when they are moving away from the RM SDK, they are also in many cases moving away from the Adobe Content Server, or at least
Right.
the at least the protection part that they built into that, the DRM part, and moving over to the Redium LCP solution instead,
Right.
where you have on the server a component that where you encrypt your EPUBs or PDFs, and then you have a client technology that can unpack those, so to speak, or decrypt them, much like you did
Right.
with the Adobe solution, but without the problems that the Adobe solution had. From an accessibility standpoint, it was a nightmare, for example. On the web, though, it's still a bit of an issue how to protect books. We do it or promote the idea of obfuscation, where we tell our clients to stream the publication in small chunks, just as the using the web platform, just as the web browser streams audio and video. We suggest streaming the EPUB down to the client the same way, and also then scrambling the data a bit and then saving it in chunks on the client machine. So you don't actually store the files, but you store you have a big bin file of shards of data basically that you can
Right.
piece together when you want to access them.
So it can still work offline, but they don't have one continuous piece.
Yeah, exactly, because it's all it's very much obfuscated into something that is very hard to piece together again, which is,
Right.
I would say, in many cases what you should do even with encrypted files, because as soon as you can find an EPUB or a PDF on your system, it's very easy to crack it. I mean, if LCP, the Adobe DRM, all of these are really easy to crack, right? So it's better to try to, again, make it really hard for the user to find the file or
Right.
put the file back together.
Right. Security by obfuscation, not just by
Yes,
encryption.
yes, and there's a combination. Of course, you can combine the two, but obfuscation, I would say, is maybe even in many cases better if you do it. If you're clever when you come up with your solution.
Right.
Choice.
Lars, you mentioned accessibility there. I thought maybe that would be the next thing to talk about. Um,
Yeah.
Given the current push in our industry toward accessibility, mostly due to the European Accessibility Act,
Yes.
where does good reading technology come in the broader sense?
Yes. This is exactly. This is one of my favorite topics, and it's been, of course, since not strange, considering what I do for a
Yeah.
living. But yes, the- it's I usually nowadays I think of I usually use the inclusive reading maybe instead of accessible reading, or
Okay.
because of I heard Richard speaking about this as
Richard
well,
Hall.
that it's trying to make an inclusive reading experience means, for me at least, that you use the same technology, regardless of if you have a print disability or you have no impairment.
Right.
And I'm trying to preach this. I'm going to have a workshop at Reimagine this May, at the end of May, where I will go through different UX solutions to make this a thing,
Very
make this
cool.
possible. Yes, what I promote is always to think of accessibility, just as we've spoken about born accessible publishing, and making publications, or thinking about accessibility and inclusion when we create books. It's very, very important that we have the same mindset when we develop our software, because
Right.
if and it's more important even to do, I think, when you develop software, because software services are so freaking expensive to develop often, right? It's if you develop a new library system or a new e-learning system or document management system, and you don't consider accessibility and inclusion when you architect your solution, you are going to end up trying to put it on top of of the solution you built,
Right.
and
Just like what Stacey said about unscrambling eggs.
it's basically the same thing, right? So this is, I mean, it's the overlay solution basically that we see in web browsers, uh, because it's not born inclusive or born accessible. And
Right.
what I've noticed is that, especially if you want to go beyond the WCAG spec, for example, when you develop a reading system, you need to think of more than. It's so easy for us sighted people to think too much in terms of visual structure, and miss out on all the things that we need to provide to the braille display or the screen
Right.
reader,
Yep.
which is obvious to us as sighted users, but application state that needs to be communicated to other forms of devices. And if you don't think of this, again, when you build your protocol, basically, for delivering information from the back end of your application, so to speak, to your front end of your application, there's going to be things missing, and that is going to be expensive to put in, and in some cases
Right.
maybe not even feasible from a budget standpoint.
Right.
And the what I feel we've been arguing for people to start working on their accessibility in their reading systems for, of course, since like 4 years back or something. And finally, the publishing industry has woken up and started, really getting into the weeds here when it comes to making sure their publications are accessible. And we've seen such a change in quality of EPUBs, I would say, over the years now. But it's still a bit worrying that the application layer, so to speak, that is used for reading publications, that's it's we're only like 12 months away from the from the
Yeah.
accessibility coming into effect. And it's worrying how few people that are upgrading their reading systems to actually comply with the regulations.
Right. Because the regulations apply just as much to the application makers as they do to the publishers, right? It's everybody in that
Yes,
value chain.
for sure. And it's like super ironic almost that you have this much discussion about accessibility and inclusion when it comes to reading, and there's so much work being done into like teaching people in production about how to make their publications accessible. But if your reading system doesn't support screen reader access, for example, then your work is wasted. I mean,
Right.
you're still not compliant, and the users will not be able to. I mean, it's it's worrying, I would say.
Mm.
And this, I would say, as far as I understood, even applies to people within, or sorry, services within the accessibility space. That they also uh, have focused to maybe have not put enough effort into. I wouldn't say effort because but I would say it's a budgetary thing.
Right.
Because again, developing software is expensive.
Yeah, yeah, and we talk about that a lot on this show about building business cases for some of these things because we can have all these
Yes,
beautiful ideas. Hopefully, with accessibility, the purse strings are loosening now as the European Accessibility Act bears down. Is that something you're
yes,
experiencing?
yeah, absolutely. Not fast enough, maybe, but I mean, probably it's going to take until maybe 2027, maybe, before it actually starts to really trickle down to the application layer. Who
Maybe
knows?
once some people get sued.
Exactly. I think it's going to need to go through the court system, the different court systems actually, depending on because it's up
Right,
to the different countries, the member states of the European Union
exactly.
to have their own implementations of the law. But it's important to anybody listening. It's important that you start now, and it's the good thing that I think I've proven with the vanilla reader experiment that I continuously work on with cool features, is that it, as we know with accessibility solutions, that because of the more expressive user experience that you get when you add like a feature as the where am I feature, for example, which is super important for both WCAG and for to pass the DAISY tests, that
Right.
wherever you are in the publication, you should be able to just get a clear understanding of where you are and what the next heading is, the previous heading, what chapter you're in, how many percent into the publication you are. All of these things are beneficial to everybody, right? Or
Yeah.
like having really solid skippability options for your TTS. Nobody wants to get stuck in like a math equation or a very deep nested list if you're using TTS.
Text to
Or
speech.
yeah, sorry, text to speech. It's a good thing I have UCM on assignment. I'm so there are so many acronyms that I use all the time. So adding these nice touches which simplify the reading experience for people who want to be able to navigate and understand the publication in different ways than a sighted person. That also benefits all the sighted readers. So it's a win-win.
Absolutely. When we're talking about things that can benefit all users, perhaps this is the moment to talk about some of the AI tools that publishers are being bombarded with right now, and what
Yes.
useful things can be done with these tools, and maybe also where to be cautious. What's some of the kind of pitfalls here?
Yeah, and I've been playing around with this. This is one of the things we played around with at the London Book Fair when we met. I showed off two experiments with generative AI. One of them was the integration with 11 Labs, where I use the 11 Labs service as a text to speech service, which it isn't really meant as. Maybe it's getting closer, but at that point the 11 labs people were popping by and asking me how I implemented it. So it
Ah,
was interesting. So that's one of the things we tried. And we also tried the thing that I'm really hyped about, which is, of course, the what I used to say like 15 years back, I called it API for a book, because this has
right.
been an experiment that I've been thinking about for a long time. Um, where I back in the day wanted to use like sentiment analysis and other like NLP tools, sorry, natural language
Got it.
processing tools, to be able to ask questions to a book.
Right. Now, I love this concept. This is so interesting. So, we're talking
Yes,
about, I mean, I always think of it in education context, but really in any,
yes,
being able to kind of interface with the information of a book by
yes.
freeform language.
Yes, exactly. And to be honest, what I wanted to use it for back in the day was I'm a avid reader of science fiction and fantasy, and those books are often written as very long series of books with complicated politics and family
Yep. World
relationships or
building.
whatever. Yes, a lot of world building. And so what I wanted to do, and that's where the sentiment analysis came in, that I wanted to be able to ask about conflicts between people, relationships between peoples. I just wanted to be able to uh, ask the book about stuff to remind myself what happened like 3 books back or whatever in the series.
Yeah.
And and it was really it was a lot of work back then. But so my I had and still have great hopes when it comes to different forms of generative AI, and being able to feed a book into a discussion and start asking questions about just these things, right?
Right.
Relationships, etc. And this is also what I showed you, I think, in my book talk experiment. And what I did was that I was very lazy, so I used. To quote Ken, I used refined laziness to to simply use the OpenAI Assistant API. And the OpenAI Assistant API lets you, one of the things you can do is to upload text and index that text in a special form of database where you can do what's called semantic queries. So the first thing I did in this experiment is that I uploaded the book when you opened it to this vector database. And then the way the assistant works in this case, and that the way that Bing works and the others that you tried maybe, is that it uses the result of the query to this database as an input to ChatGPT.
Ah,
So you can ask the book something, right? And the book will respond much more in a much more like it will give you a way to ask the book, and it will give you like excerpts of the book that matches your search query without using exact word exact what's it called when you do a word search, basically you have to be
right.
precise,
Right.
because semantic search uses similarity basically between synonyms basically and etc. to be able for you to search in a looser way.
Right.
And
Brilliant.
then it takes that search result and feeds it to the generative AI, and then you get something that sounds more like human speech getting returned to you.
Amazing.
It is amazing, and it's getting better by the day. But the problem is, and I think this is a problem that is understated in a huge way by all the big companies, because they've invested so much in this tech that they don't want to present it as a real issue. But the problem you have is that it just gives you back bullshit in so many instances. It's called hallucinations. That's
Yep.
a nicer term, perhaps, but it
Yep.
is proper. It's better to think of it as bullshit because that is actually more what it's doing. It's bullshitting you. So it will sometimes give you a way to link back to the book, for example. But even if it quotes what you think is a quote from the book, and it has the source information from the book, because that's part of what you got when you queried the database. It still has a tendency to give you factual statements that are not facts.
Right. And we've all seen these coming from ChatGPT interactions where people are sharing
Yes,
some of the stranger things that they've had said to
yes,
them.
and this happens still continuously. This happens, and I don't care what their graphs say because they always show you these graphs that they are so precise, but it's not true. It's a lie. It's marketing. And the problem is that I usually say that if you're using generative AI for like creating images, it doesn't really matter if the fur on your dog is not really spot on, a Labrador. You asked for
Mm.
a Labrador with a rabbit riding on it. It's not that big of a deal if the Labrador's fur is not correct.
Right.
The equivalent when you do this with in your in a book, let's say where you use it for studying or whatever, is that you fail your exam.
Right.
So the implications of hallucinations is like it's a different paradigm basically, right? So
Yeah.
and this is still very much a huge problem, I would say, and the reason I would not use this at this point. I have ideas, but as at this point, without being, making workarounds to like Bing does, for example, where it actually has, a couple of goals of post processing the information to actually get the quotes right and so on.
Right.
That's how I understand that they do it. Um, But using just the out of the box solutions that these companies offer, and not spending a lot of time on your own solutions, this, at least from my limited testing, you shouldn't just implement these things and say that, well, 8 times out of 10 is good enough, because I'm thinking that the implications of getting things wrong is pretty bad.
Right. This makes me think about other things that are being offered to publishers right now using AI. A lot of these are
Yeah.
image description tools. This is a kind of hot topic right now. As somebody who's experimented a lot with AI, what would you say to publishers who are playing with those? Because you talked about not just taking what comes out of the AI, and I've been saying the same to publishers that really you might want to use it in your image description workflow in some way, but bear in mind you can't just take it as it is. You've got to still have a human look over it. From your kind of
Yeah.
wide experience playing around with AI, where do you stand on this?
I think it can be wonderful, but the problem is that you don't know when it fails. And I wish I spoke to a company, it was in this Monday actually, and they had a strategy where they had competing AIs to try to mitigate. So they
Right,
had a couple of these models where they compared results, because the problem is, and they only use the output if at least one of the three, or sorry, two of the three were like consistent with each other. Um,
right,
but this is not a viable solution, because these, the working models that you have that are good enough are extremely expensive to run. And the problems that you have, what you would like is for the AI to be able to tell you how certain it is that it got it right. But the problem with generative AI is that it doesn't have any understanding of what it created. Um,
right.
so if we go back to the rabbit and the dog, once it's created the rabbit riding on a dog and it gives you that back, you can't ask questions about what it did, basically, because it doesn't know. It doesn't have the understanding that it created a rabbit on a dog. It knows that you prompted it to do it, but it hasn't analyzed the output. Again, as I understand how these things work, these are black box processes.
Right.
Um, and this is also why, maybe moving back to the rendering of speech with 11 Labs, for example, that it generates a sentence for you, but it doesn't know what's in the sentence. It
Yeah.
knows the input prompt that you gave it, and it knows the text it was supposed to render. But just as with the rabbit and the Labrador, it doesn't know. It generates a blob for you, where statistical significance basically has rendered an audio file to you. But if you ask it about word offsets within that audio file, it would need to transcribe that audio file in order to get that kind of data back, because it doesn't know what it's done,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's my understanding of how it works. And I think that's the huge problem with, for
Right.
example, generating image descriptions, that it won't be able to tell you if it got it right, because it doesn't know what it's doing.
Right.
Um,
So even just a really technical description of what's in an image still might not be correct in the context of the book that it's in, given what's already happened, given what it might assume that the reader knows, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And now with the multimodal models, it can, use the previous input and output to reanalyze it and try to understand what it did. But it's a post-processing thing. It doesn't have
Right.
understanding as we do, right? It doesn't have like a cognitive process where it reasons in a way that we would recognize as reasoning.
Right. It's unscrambling eggs.
Yeah, it's unscrambling eggs. Exactly. It's like the PDF, right? You render a PDF and you say, oh, I got a document out, but it's not a document. It doesn't have any words or any, it has characters and at X and Y and Z positions. So when you open a PDF in Adobe or wherever, it's actually unscrambling eggs and trying to understand what it did when it distilled it, as it used to be called, into something that is no longer a document with semantics.
Right.
And it's basically the same thing with these AI thingies, except with PDFs, you have a better way of actually trying to deduce what's up. But it's
Right.
similar. Yeah. So use AI as a tool, of course, if you want to, and for inspiration and maybe a starting point. But don't fool yourself that it's going to, at this point in time, give
Yeah.
you something that you don't need to moderate, basically.
Right. Yeah, none of us want to make statements about where these things might end up,
No, no, no,
but
no, no.
we can only talk to the state of things as they are.
I think it's if you look at AI projects that really work, like AlphaFold, for example. And AlphaFold is the Google project that can take a protein structure and show you how it will fold in the biologic systems in your body.
Right.
The reason it works, they sell it as like only generative AI, but the reason it works is because it has like a pipeline where it also knows chemistry.
Right.
So the reason it knows if molecules can fit together and so on is because it knows again, it knows chemistry. So it knows what repels and what attracts and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
I'm not a chemist. That's how I understood it anyway. And I think we need something akin to that. And that's a very old, 80s way of doing things. It's a rule-based AI system. And I think we need maybe to come closer to that as well, because the step where you try to apply rules, that's where you can get some kind of deterministic output that tells you how wrong how good the approximation is.
Right. There's reasoning involved of a
Yeah, and
kind.
exactly, some sort of reasoning, some sort of like reasoning tree. And I think
Right.
we need maybe to have that as well. Maybe we use object detection as well to try to, first of all, like a step, find things that classify the image, and then use the generative AI to give us some form of text output
Yeah.
that works well in a book, for example. I don't know.
Yeah. That makes sense.
It's exciting, Simon.
Very. Lars, it's too exciting, I think, and you and I could probably talk about this all day.
Yes.
But we will end it here for now. Thank you so much for joining me here and for sharing your story with us. It's really fascinating stuff, and it's particularly interesting to think about where some of this stuff might go in the future, and some of them kind
Yeah.
of more exotic use cases. Very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm not giving up.
No, damn right. So, if anybody who wants to get in touch with you and learn more about Colibrio, how should they find you?
Well, they can go to colibrio.com, of course. Please go to demo.colibrio.com and test the vanilla reader and play around with it and give me feedback. And I would also like to promote that you, as a listener, if you're developing reading systems or working with like a product manager or something with a reading system, you should have a look at the DAISY reading system group, where we discuss usability and features for your reading system. And you have people with lived experiences on those calls where you can ask questions about best practices and so on. So we need more people in that group. So please join the DAISY reading system call. And they can also send an email to lars@colibrio.com. And yes, geek out with me regarding digital reading.
Yeah, geeking out with Lars is a good time.
Hmm.
I can confirm that one. Brilliant. Well, before we sign off, I just wanted to say a thank you to everybody who's got in touch about the first few episodes of the show, and some really kind words and really great reception. So I'm very grateful. And I hope you will all join me again for the next episode of the Digital Publishing Podcast.